welcome to the Buck Stops here on NDTV 24/7. I'm Kajori Sen, and today in focus, the Prime Minister's visit to Brazil, where he will be engaging in the first big multilateral diplomatic meet since coming to power. On the agenda at the BRICS Summit, an ambitious challenge to the Western-run multilaterals that have shaped global finances. But as far as India is concerned, the big question at the BRICS Summit, should Mr. Modi's focus be on a more dominant role for India and countering the China threat? Is that what needs to be looked at? We're going to be discussing that right here on the show in NDTV 24/7. But before that, let's quickly take you through an overview of BRICS and what's expected from this summit. Now, BRICS is, of course, the grouping of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. It has an odd origin. The phrase was first used in a Goldman Sachs report that identified these countries with the most economic potential for growth. Now, nearly 15 years after that, the International Confederation has seen 5 years of summits that have been described as more miss than hit. As Narendra Modi, whose political position is based on a push for economic development, gets set to attend his first diplomatic summit for BRICS, one that is marked by the inauguration of a developmental bank, does his focus need to be countering China, reminding the international community of the significance of BRICS, or both of these things?
Prime Minister Modi off to Brazil for his first diplomatic test on a global stage. But will he manage to make his mark at BRICS, a multilateral forum comprising of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, and wrest a more dominant role for India? At the top of the BRICS agenda is setting up a development bank, first discussed at the BRICS meet in Delhi in 2012. With a corpus of $100 billion, this bank will fund projects for emerging developing countries. The crucial question, will it be headquartered in Delhi or Shanghai? Will Prime Minister Modi succeed in bringing the bank to New Delhi, as China already has the infrastructure? In a statement released before the Prime Minister boarded the plane, he said, "In particular, I look forward to the successful conclusion of major BRICS initiatives like the new development bank and the contingent reserve arrangement, which have seen significant progress since their launch in New Delhi in 2012. Also on the agenda, India's security concerns. Prime Minister Modi will have bilaterals with all BRICS leaders. The first one with China's President Xi Jinping, who is expected to be in India later this year. Can the Prime Minister procure an assurance from China to stop all incursions in the disputed areas till a permanent solution is found? Russia, China and India will also discuss security situation in Afghanistan. The three countries have been exchanging views on the matter. But as the exit of combat troops in Afghanistan nears, the threat has become more real. China's all-weather friend status with Pakistan is a roadblock. At BRICS, 4 of the top economies are meeting. This is an opportunity for the Prime Minister to establish a rapport with leaders he will be working with over the next 5 years. In New Delhi, Aanchal Vora, NDTV.
And joining me now, Sambit Patra, spokesperson BJP, Sanjay Jha, spokesperson Congress, and KC Singh, former Secretary, Minister of External Affairs. Before we get the two spokespersons of the political parties into this, Mr. Singh, let me go over to you. Let's talk about, if you can put in perspective for us, the significance of this particular BRICS summit, and particularly the announcement of that developmental bank, the kind of role that India feels that it needs to play in pushing that oppositional model to Western funding sources forward.
It might be useful by starting with the basic thought that BRICS have lost some of their shine, and this is mainly because of the slowdown of the BRICS economies. China from double digit came to 7%, India has come down to 5%, Brazil to 3%, South Africa even further down. So some of the shine, the expectation which was there in the Goldman Sachs report may not be entirely valid any longer. But nevertheless, this is still a very important group, 43% of the world's population, and a very strong combination of GDPs of 4 or 5 countries. Now, it is important in one sense that 2 of these members are Security Council, permanent members of the Security Council. 2 others are aspirants, India and Brazil. South Africa is also a sort of aspirant. So there are many global issues in which all 5 should be interested. But that is where the convergence ends, because they have different interests. We've seen that Russia used to be a connection between the BRICS and the G7. But now they are suffering sanctions at the hands of G7. They've actually been excluded from the group of G7, so that bridging is no longer available. We've seen a convergence between Russia and China. There's a gas deal. There's much better coordination between them. So what is the political message that BRICS wants to send? Is it going to adopt a bit of an anti-US, anti-Western stance? I don't think Mr. Modi would want that. We know that at least two of the countries are very unhappy about the NSA spying on them.
Sure.
The Brazilian president cancelled a visit to Washington. We ourselves have a problem with BJP being spied on. So there are many of these issues where Mr. Modi stepping forth for his first major visit abroad, really has to position India and see whether you want to go along with them or you want to keep one foot there and one foot in the Western world. And how do you balance it?
And I think that sums up the crux of the problem, Sambit, and let me take it to you. That very careful balancing act that Mr. Modi will have to push for. Now, Mr. Modi has sent out a very clear message in his swearing-in ceremony, calling the SAARC countries, making it very clear he wants to work with other developing countries. But it has to be a very careful act because there are so many equations coming into play. As Mr. Singh was just pointing out, Russia and China, for example, a traditional ally that we've had, somewhat fraught relationship on the other hand that we've had with China historically. All of these need to be looked at.
No, diplomacy as such is a tightrope walk. I mean, diplomacy anywhere is a tightrope walk, but I believe this BRIC meeting should not be seen as put by many newspapers as an India-China flashpoint, not at all. In fact, the statement that was released by the Prime Minister's office today speaks volumes about his expectations from the BRIC meeting. In the first and foremost, he says that with the changing global economics, where there are Western slowdowns and emerging economics in the part of the world we live in, it's but natural that we should work in tandem together. Secondly, he mentions that there are backdrops which needs to be discussed. For example, we have an Iraq crisis, we have the Ukrainian crisis, and they would be meeting the presidents of premiers of both the countries, Russia and India, would be meeting on the backdrop of all these issues. So I believe these two issues are extremely important. Third important issue is, apart from the BRICS central objective, there would be collateral meetings of the premiers of the various states. For instance, as soon as he lands there in Brazil, immediately within, I believe, an hour or 2 hours, he'd be meeting the Chinese premier, he would be meeting the Russian premier. So I believe this would send out a very strong signal, and we all are aware of the fact that Mr. Modi is a man of trade.
A strong signal, yes, Sambit. But I think where this debate tends to diverge is whether the BRICS meeting should be putting forward a united face of these 5 countries as it was originally imagined to be, or whether it becomes small alliances on the sidelines. And I think that's a question that needs to be looked at by the government.
No, but at the end of the day, the press release of Mr. Narendra Modi categorically speaks that we all are in unison, in the sense that the backdrops are very different. The backdrop is of a crisis which is developing in Southeast Asia, and naturally we all have to come together to see to it that we are not affected by the crisis and how the crisis is best resolved. Then he speaks of the economy, because on the prime agenda of BRICS is the new bank, the new development bank. So it's a 100 billion bank.
Right. Now, let me just actually, you're making a point there which I want to take over to Sanjay. Sanjay, you know, BRICS has now been officially around for the last 5 years. We've seen issues crop up earlier in the Delhi summit, in the Durban summit. We've seen a unanimous plan being drawn out. We've seen them not come to fruition. Do you think that's been an issue the former government did not push sufficiently?
Kajuri, you know, firstly, what we need to recognize is that all the countries in the BRICS that you have today, you know, I think it's a very unique congregation, because these are countries which are super emerging markets, or you call them the newly industrialized countries, and they are across several continents of the world. So I mean, you can see that this is in a great number of ways a very singular pluralistic setup. Now the critical point, I think, that we all need to recognize that although there will inevitably be a political complexion, because these are all, you know, powerful countries, many of them are in the G20, etc., but fundamentally they are meant to work in a greater economic integration. You know, there has been this perception for a long time, and I think largely justified, that the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund has been very, very hard on many of these economies during the difficult times, in terms of, you know, making them, force them to structural adjustments that may have impacted their domestic economy not very favorably. So now with India and China, I think there are other countries as well, but India and China really the forefront. You can't discount either Brazil or South Africa or Russia at all. I mean, you know, the talk of this big global financial institution that is being created as some kind of a mini World Bank, is a very, in my opinion, a very bold, pragmatic, and almost an adventurous step to say that, listen, we will create a parallel entity. It will have shareholding by different countries based on their capacity to contribute, and that's where the debate or where the headquarters of the financial
do you think
institution
that also comes from the slightly fraught relationship that most of these countries in the last 3 to 4 years have had with the World Bank and the IMF?
I'll give you an example. I'm glad you asked me the question. You see, the Western world is already trying to dismiss what I believe is a very laudable concept, with a lot of contemptuous indifference. One of the Morgan Stanley's report has called this as the fragile five. And, they are basing it on the fact that, the slowdown has affected all our countries, and that, is the cloud, was there too much of hype on the economic growth that all our countries were experiencing around 4 to 5 years ago? So I think it's important for all the political leaders here to look at it with a more far-sightedness. What worries me, to be honest, is the fact that already in terms of the shareholding contribution of the different countries in the global bank that they are creating, there's already a fight as to who should contribute how much and where should the capital be. These are things that have to iron out, but hopefully, these are all senior political leaders. They all have big mandates.
Absolutely.
So hopefully they'll come to a very mature decision.
Right. Now, I think, Sambit, one of the key points that was brought up both by Mr. Singh and by Sanjay is that the reputation of all these 5 countries have taken a bit of a hit. They are being seen as removed from the super growth prospects that was seen in 2001 when the BRICS term was coined. Is that a perception attitude that this summit, this development bank needs to address, and therefore something that Mr. Modi, who has been pushing development as a premier agenda, has to address?
This is all the more reason as to why all these countries should be acting more in unison than having their personal agendas, in the sense that they have to get back their glory. There was an article, if I remember, on the Wall Street Journal, a few months or a year ago, that in fact the investors, the way the investors have withdrawn their money from these countries to see to it that the currencies of this country were hit when the stimulus in the US was talked about. So I believe that is the reason as to why even Sanjay Jha was suggesting that the bank, which is an adventurous step, and in fact a very welcome step, giving a competition almost to the World Bank and the IMF. And that is the reason I again reiterate that we have to work in unison. Yes, let me remind you of the fact that Mr. Narendra Modi, when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, he was one of the most important factors of drawing in investments from China. So I believe the kind of trade analysis that Mr. Narendra Modi has, the trade diplomacy, that is going to shine over here in the BRICS.
But while we are talking about those relationships, let me go back to Mr. Singh, because Mr. Singh, I think, made a point there that neither Sanjay or Sambit have really answered yet, which is that, of course, unison is important, Mr. Singh, but at the end of the day, BRICS is a very difficult situation of trying to balance individual interests with what is at the end of the day a very rough coming together of 5 developing countries. Do you think that that could pose a problem? We've been talking about the development bank, but one of the big issues, Mr. Singh, is where the headquarters of that is going to be. And do you think those could be sticking points?
You see, firstly, the balance which was there in BRIC, it was originally just 4 countries. South Africa came in later, and it's not really the size of the other 4, but the Chinese were very keen to bring South Africa in. And now with the convergence between Russia and China, you find there's an imbalance, because India is really outvoted in that sense, because there's much greater convergence between these 3. And we've seen some of this coming out in the founding of the Development Bank, where there is talk that originally it was felt that all 5 will put in $10 billion. Then the Chinese said they will put in extra money, but they wanted more voting rights. And that is one of the things which has been debated, that should it be an equal participation, or the one with an economy which is 4 times the size of the economy of India or Brazil or Russia should be calling the shots. And I think Chinese sooner or later are going to push it in that direction. So has it become a stalking horse for China? Now that is something where Mr. Modi will be tested. He'll have to assert himself there and see what bridges and balance he can create within the BRICS, so that it doesn't become a China show and completely driven by a Chinese agenda. That is the first thing. The second thing is, the Russians said last time, some private think tanks have been talking about military and political cooperation. I think they're feeling isolated after Ukraine. They're feeling pushed out by the G7. Now you don't want Russia to bring in those differences into BRICS. And at the same time, the Chinese have their serious problems in South China Sea and East China Sea with Japan and the ASEAN countries with whom we want to reach out in any case. And as you know, Prime Minister Abe of Japan is waiting for a visit from PM Modi. So we are in this middle boat where this balancing has to be done. You don't want to lose completely the race on the BRICS side, but at the same time, you don't want your relationship with a whole slew of countries to be affected by these people hijacking it.
Right. I think that's an important point that Mr. Singh brought up there, which I'm going to take to both Sambit and Sanjay. Sambit, let me take it to you first, which is, at the end of the day, the question here needs to be answered. Is BRICS an economic summit or is it a political one?
No, I believe it is a bit of either, because in fact the Prime Minister's statement also says that we have to resolve the issues which are acting as crisis in this area, and also we have to see to it as to how we help our economics of the area. So it's a bit of both, but the question of importance over here, what Mr. Singh was also suggesting, Sanjay was also suggesting, is the unequal contribution by the countries into the World Bank, a 50 billion contribution by China, and China has a point, if I remember rightly, stated that this is not into the main corpus, but this would be the emergency fund of the new development bank. So let's see as to how this whole thing works out, whether it is Shanghai or Delhi. But I believe India has pledged that it is New Delhi which should be the headquarters of the bank. So I believe it turns out all good. The Prime Minister is already in the visit. So I believe not much of politics into it. We should keep our fingers crossed, and we should have belief and faith in the astute character and nature, the diplomatic nature of our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi.
Sanjay, let me take that over to you now. What's your take on it?
Well, Kajuri, my firm belief is that, as I said even earlier, these are political leaders who are leading the largest populations of the world. If you include India and China, you're talking about every one person in three being either an Indian or a Chinese, and plus you add the other countries, it's a significant 40% of the population base of the world. But having said that, let's recognize one hard reality, that the United States and Europe will continue to dominate world economy for the foreseeable future, despite China overtaking US as the largest economy of the world in the coming months. I think the fundamental point that we need to recognize, and Sambit mentioned that, is, when the United States had quantitative easing, the entire emerging markets, caught a cold. US sniffs, everybody catches a cold. Now that's a fact. Now I truly believe that the future of this movement will have to be more economically driven, for the simple one reason that, I think the acronym of BRICS will not last very long, because there are countries like Turkey, Argentina, Indonesia, who want to be part of BRICS. I mean, they do want to be part of a larger economic body that will have a greater cohesive say in matters of world finance. And I do believe in that sense, the leadership of all the current members will have to be very visionary, because you can't include members and make this into another club that falls and collapses within its own internal contradictions in the future.
Right. Now, let me in fact open that question up then, which is that if economics is going to have to be the focus, if the West is going to continue being the dominant power, does BRICS need to take, Mr. Singh, I'll take this to you first, does BRICS need to take a re-look at how it has functioned? Are we looking at the need for a kind of Marshall Plan in the BRICS community possibly to take it forward? Are we replicating too many of the North-South models? Are we not looking at a South-South model? Are we not playing to our strengths because we're too used to engaging in a West-dominated field? Are these questions that Mr. Modi should be asking for answers from at the BRICS Summit?
You see, when the Bretton Woods institutions were created, that is World Bank and IMF, their initial work was all in the reconstruction of Europe. They did not pay any attention to the developing world. That came much later. Now, it is this kind of a role that the Development Bank, which is being set up by BRICS, can play. And also, one of the problems at the moment with IMF and World Bank is that there is no money available for infrastructure development in the emerging economies. And that is that will be a focus area. And that is something that this government has also essentially articulated and talked about. Huge sums are required, not only just by India, but countries in Africa, because there's going to be huge growth in Africa. That's why the last summit was held in Africa, and the theme was Africa. And this time the theme is Latin America. But I agree with what has been said in the program, that you can't make this group too large. We've seen this happen in the past. G77, 2/3 of the UN membership joins in. then it just becomes too large. It becomes a kind of a village mela, and there is no agenda left. This has to be agenda driven. But at the same time, it can't be a lopsided agenda with China or Russia bringing in just their interests. We'll see how it plays out. And that is where India can play a balancing role and have them stick to a basic sustainable development agenda and keep the Western agendas out, where they are using some of these arguments, Rio 20, etc., to really bring them into trade, into international finance, into international economy, to really beat down the the emerging economies.
Right, we're running out of time now, so I'm going to, we're running out of time, so I'm going to open it up to Sambit and Sanjay to finish off the show.
I would just like to remind us to what Mr. Modi has said today. He said that the summit, I mean the title of the summit this time, the 6th summit of BRICS, is Inclusive Growth and Sustainable Development. Mr. Modi wants that we should learn from this, and this should be the projection in the post-2015 United Nations Development Agenda. So development is what we are going to buy. So I believe what Bharatiya Janata Party and Mr. Narendra Modi has been speaking since long, he's going to see play there also in BRICS.
Right, Sanjay, I'll give you the last word on this.
Well, I do believe that, all emerging market economies, no matter what their size and what their local issues, all of them face similar challenges down the line. What we faced with Commonwealth Games, Brazil is faced with construction of the World Cup, the kind of issues they've had. All of them have similar challenges, which, when growth slows down, the society goes into a period of unrest. There is a lot more social, anger at the governments, etc. So I think it's very important that with challenges being similar, all of them begin to somewhere down the line begin to share what are the kind of solutions they have found and what are the commonalities that they can possibly work on. I think that in a great number of ways could help all of them to overcome some domestic challenges which could be similar across countries.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Singh, Sambit, Sanjay, taking us through what really the BRICS Summit represents today and what Mr. Modi needs to be looking at, what he needs to be wary of in the BRICS Summit and the meetings he's going to be having on the sidelines. Moving on now, former Maharashtra Chief Minister Ashok Chavan, no stranger to controversy with the Adarsh scam, tainting his tenure and leading to his resignation. Despite that, Chavan was one of the only Congress leaders to claim a Lok Sabha victory in Maharashtra in the 2014 elections, a position that could soon be taken away from him. The Election Commission today issued a notice to Chavan asking why he should not be disqualified after finding him guilty of fudging political expenses in the 2009 Maharashtra Assembly elections. Arunachalam Vaidyanathan reports.
Former Maharashtra Chief Minister Ashok Chavan in serious trouble, maybe looking at disqualification as a Lok Sabha MP and being barred from contesting elections for the next 3 years. The Election Commission today found him guilty of fudging his poll expenditure in the Bhokar Assembly constituency in 2009, or paid news. Losing candidate Madhav Rao Kinhalkar and BJP complained to the Commission about Chavan not including the expenditure for 25 advertisements in Marathi newspapers in his accounts. Chavan tried his best to stop Election Commission probing this by approaching the Delhi High Court and then the Supreme Court, but failed. The Election Commission in its 104-page order says, the Commission is of the considered view that respondent cannot validly claim ignorance about the publications of the above-mentioned 25 advertisements in which his name, the name of his constituency and also his photograph prominently appeared. Finding Chavan guilty, the Commission issued a show-cause notice to him, seeking his reply within 20 days. Ashok Chavan has failed to lodge his account of election expenses in the manner required by the Act and rules. The Commission directs the respondent to show cause in terms of Rule 89, Section 5 of the 1961 rules why he should not be disqualified. Election Commission has cautioned the media and asked them to be more responsible by saying, the minimum that is expected of ethical journalism is that the reader is cautioned by suitable disclaimers while such articles are published so that the unwary reader can make suitable allowance in his mind while forming his judgment. This matter assumes greater significance in the election period when the media needs to show greater responsibility. Chavan survived the Adarsh scam but now caught in the paid news issue. The Commission finding him guilty is the first step towards his disqualification. With Arunachalam Vaidyanathan in New Delhi, Vega Bakshi for NDTV.
And Ashok Chavan told NDTV the judgment on paid news is clear. They have ruled out the paid news element. No such advertisement given by me and my election agents. We will respond to the show cause notice. Moving on now, with just 4% of the season's rainfall so far, a desperate situation for farmers in Gujarat who have turned to prayer since they have nothing else.
A common sight in parts of Gujarat these days, prayers for appeasing an unrelenting rain god. The monsoons have been delayed by almost a month. The state government admits that the situation is turning increasingly desperate. Their priority, drinking water for farmers and their cattle.
पूरी विकट समस्या हो गई है। पीने का पानी, पशुओं के लिए घास चारा और नई बुनाई करने के लिए किसानों को जो इरिगेशन का पानी चाहिए, वो भी हमारे जो डैम है, वो डैम में जो पानी हमने भरा रखा है, वो पीने के पानी के लिए रिजर्व रखा है।
Though the Met Department has predicted rains in the next few days, on the ground, the situation is worsening. The state has so far received 4% of the season's total rainfall. 93 out of the 155 talukas in the state hasn't received any rainfall. Sowing activity is on in only about 15% of the farms across the state.
In farms across Gujarat, sowing activity has come to a standstill, with farmers unsure about the rains. Those who have actually carried out sowing on their fields are waiting for the rains to come. A further delay of a week could spell disaster.
Jairam Thakur, a villager in North Gujarat who has sown cotton, is a worried man. Having spent over 40,000 on sowing, time is now running out.
વરસાદ નહીં આવે તો હવે આ તો જો પાણી બંધ થાય પીવાની સંજોગ ઊભા થાય તો પાણી અમને ના મળે ને તો એ પોઝિશન અમારું ઊભી થાય કે આ બધું ભળી જાય કશું થાય નહીં.
For farmers like Jairam, hope is the only thing they are clinging on to. Hope that finally the rain gods relent. With Rohit Bhan in Ahmedabad, in New Delhi, Sanjukta Kar for NDTV.
That's all from me for now. News updates will continue on NDTV 24/7. Thanks for watching and stay tuned.